Hi, Doug here from the next season. In this video, I'm going to do things a little differently. I'm not going to show the cleaning that you do every time. I'm not going to show much of the sanding that you do every time, nor am I going to show any or very little of the painting. Instead, you wonder, what am I going to show you then? Well, I'm going to show you the interesting parts of this project. The first one is modernizing the base. I cut it. So let's go over how I did that and what you need to look for. The second piece to this was addressing the drawer boxes. They were a shambles. So I had to patch them and I had to make them look new again. So how do you do that? And then the third piece of this puzzle was the Sausalito finish. There are many videos about how to do that. I'm going to show you how I do it, the paints that I use, and then finally the reveal of the finished dresser. So follow along and let's see how this all turns out. If your dresser or nightstand has a curvy base, one way to modernize it is to cut it. Now, when doing so, you need to measure, measure, and measure again to make sure that you know exactly where you're going to cut. I then apply painter's tape as a guide for the saw that I'm going to use. I usually use a jigsaw just because it's more compact and I can usually get it into where I'm going. So I start with my first cut. And once that's done, I make what's called a relief cut, which is kind of an angled cut so that I can get my blade easily in so I can cut the length of the base. So the jigsaw is pretty handy in this case because you can kind of turn it and you can make that cut. So once I have this cut made, I then usually go to the opposite end and I cut the base there. Now that that's done, I am ready to cut the whole length of the base and get rid of all the curvy parts that were popular back in the day. So now I've got a long part. It's really important that you keep your saw steady and following the tape that you laid down to mark where you want to cut. If you go above or below the tape, then you're going to have to use a sander or possibly a hand planer to fix the issue. So you want to go slow and you just want to cut, and once that's done, then your base is modernized. You then are going to sand it to work off any of the rough edges, and then you are ready to go. Just know exactly what you're going to do before you start to cut, because once you cut, you're committed and it's the point of no return. Almost every furniture refinishing project comes with a problem or an issue that you need to resolve. Sometimes you've been there before, sometimes it's brand new. In this particular project, my issue were the drawer boxes. They were very rough, they were coming apart in places where these were plywood sides and the wood was lifting up. There were places where there were gouges and had to be patched with wood filler. And so what I needed to do was to fix these drawer boxes and cover that wood filler so that they, looked like they should have looked like in the first place. I did this using a paint wash and a golden oak stain. So as I was sanding the drawers, things like this happened. You can see a whole chunk has just pulled out, the top layer of the plywood. Now this isn't the only drawer this happened to. So now I have to patch the places where this has happened. So after sanding all the drawer boxes and patching with that wood filler all the imperfections, here are some examples of what I'm facing. This is probably the worst drawer, but I've got that wood filler everywhere. And so this needs to be covered up. I don't want to use a solid color, so my first attempt is going to be a paint wash. So I'm mixing a paint wash in a 5 parts water to 1 part paint. I'm using a color called Universal Khaki from Sherwin-Williams, which is what I'm going to be painting the base coat of the dresser in. And as it turns out, this was not the right ratio. It's way too watery. I had to actually add paint. But it is working in places where I don't have any patches, which is not the issue. It's where I have patches, and it's not covering very well. So that's when I figured out I had to add paint. And but I'm going to do several coats on this and wiping them down between coats until I finally get to a point where I'm satisfied with the saturation and covering the problem areas. So I started to figure out that if I dabbed a little bit of undiluted paint onto the areas that I had patched and then kind of blotted off the excess, and then let that set for a few minutes, then apply the paint wash, that tended to cover up the patched areas a lot more, almost to the point of I couldn't see them at all. So that's what I started to do, and I had to redo a few places that I had already done. So I'm blotting on, some, undiluted paint, and then I'll paint the paint wash on that. Now I did have to apply 2, sometimes 3 coats of paint wash on it before I finally got a look that I was satisfied with. So although paint washing the drawer boxes was a vast improvement over what I started with, I still wasn't completely satisfied. I started to think, what else can I do? And then I think to myself, why not apply stain over the paint wash? So I went out and I got some Golden Oak water-based stain from Behr, and I decided to stain over top of the paint wash to see what kind of effect that would give me. So I started to apply the stain with this small foam brush. I should have used a bigger brush, but the can or jar that the stain was in had a small mouth, so this worked fine. But as I started to spread the stain out, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. I thought, this is the look I'm actually trying to achieve. It's not a painted look. It's more of a natural look. And it turns out it almost matches the inside of the drawers almost perfectly. So I went ahead and applied the stain, wiped off, and only applied 1 coat in most situations. But this is the look that I'm actually trying to achieve. And although I didn't know what kind of a look I was trying to achieve in the beginning, it's kind of like once you see it, you know it. And this was it. It was the right color stain. It didn't look very artificial or artificial at all, actually. Like I said, it matched the inside of the drawers. And going over the paint wash, so I accomplished with the paint wash to hide the patches, and I accomplished with the stain to make it look more like a non-painted drawer box. So this is how the drawers turned out after a paint wash and the stain. And I want to show you the inside of the drawers. If I get in good light here, it almost matches. I didn't do that on purpose, it just happened that way. So it looks like you can stain over paint wash. You can repair damaged drawer sides, and I'm really pleased with how this all turned out. So remember that the next time that you have drawers that are pretty poorly made, they're roughed up, and you need to do something, but you really don't want to paint them, this could be a good alternative. So to create the Sausalito finish, you need to apply glaze over your tan base coat. I use Rust-Oleum decorative glaze in a Java color. That's pretty standard actually. Um, for smaller areas I need to spread the glaze out in, I use a slightly smaller brush. This would be like for trim on the dresser. I use a 2.5-inch brush to apply the glaze to the dresser. I then use a 6-inch deck brush to start to smooth it out and remove glaze. And finally, this little broom that will give it the faux grain effect you were trying to achieve. I also will, before I start glazing, I will tape off areas I do not want to get glaze on. That way I don't have to try to clean them up later. So now you're ready to apply the glaze. If you're applying the glaze to a large area, especially if it's warm and humid outside, I would do it in sections at a time. Keep a wet edge on the section that you're finished so you can blend in the next section. But this is not that big of an area, and it's in the 60s here in Florida, and so I'm really not going to, I'm going to do the whole thing all at once. And so the thing you want to do is just simply get the glaze on. It doesn't have to be pretty because you're going to use your deck brush to start removing the glaze and creating the look that you want. So the next step is to take your deck brush and in even strokes brush it the length of the area that you're working in the direction of the grain. Once you brush it on or brush it, you want to be removing the stain that you just got on the deck brush. You just don't want to keep moving the same glaze around over and over. I said stain, but really glaze. And so you keep doing this until you get the amount of glaze off that you want, that you have the look that you want, that it looks fairly even, if that's what you're going after. That's usually what I go after, is an even look across the entire surface where there's no really overly dark areas or overly light areas. And also make sure you get the edges going in the same direction as the grain. You don't want to have the edges look unfinished while the rest of the piece looks finished. So you keep doing this until you finally get to the point where you have the look that you want. There's no real science here. It's whatever you like. But just remember to keep brushing evenly, getting the glaze off the brush each time you brush. And then when you're finally done, there'll be time to use the broom to, again, take more glaze off, but to also create the grain effect that you're trying to achieve. So the final step of applying or creating the Sausalito finish, at least the way I do it, is I take this broom, and this is going to, this broom I get from the dollar store. It's like a buck, well, from the dollar store, it's $1.25 now, not a buck, but it is a little, whisk broom type of thing. Looks like, some kind of steel bristles on it. But this will give you the grain effect that you're trying to achieve, as well as removing more of the glaze. And if you find something that's got into the glaze, you can simply remove your finger and then just keep brushing back and forth to even the glaze back out. There's no right or wrong way to do this. You just simply keep brushing, keep removing the glaze from the broom as you go. Until you have it evened out the way that you want it to look. And you just keep doing this until you like it. Back and forth, gentle strokes, not very hard. And I like to go even strokes the whole length of the piece if I can. And I just keep doing this until I like it. An optional step that some people do is to infuse additional colors into your finish. Some use yellow, some use gray, some use a combination. I just use one color. I use a gray glaze from General Finishes, and I have to water this down quite a bit because the working time is almost impossible on this. It's very, very short, so I need to thin it. But basically, the technique is I take a little bit on a brush, I dab most of it off onto a paper towel to use kind of a dry brush effect, and then I very gently whisk the glaze onto the surface. Once I've got it on there, I just do it randomly. I then take a soft cloth and I wipe it down so that it's just a very subtle grayish effect. I think it gives a kind of a coastal vibe, driftwoody type of vibe into the finish. And again, this is totally optional, but I do this on all my pieces that I do a Sausalito style. I really like the effect, but you certainly don't want to let it dry. You want to buff it or wipe it down to the point where it's just you can barely see it, so it doesn't look globby or spotty or anything. You want to really to blend into that finish. And if you do that, once that's done, then the dresser or nightstand or whatever you're doing is complete and it's ready to be revealed. So here is a finished dresser. I didn't say it earlier, but I also top coated this with 3 coats of a matte polyurethane finish. This turned out great. So, we modified the base, we fixed the drawers, and we applied a Sausalito style finish, and this just turned out beautiful. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you found anything useful or helpful, I hope that you subscribe and stay tuned for the next video from the next season.